So after something's been published, but the client has brought it to you and said, I this needs additional editing in some way, or
Yep.
it needs something more, or needs to be expanded or touched. So what are the things that you think about, or what type of role or resource would get involved in that?
Yeah. And I think, especially in the world we're in, Jeff, we see a lot of that in that oftentimes clients come to us and they know they need new content, but they also maybe have a whole library of content, existing content that isn't performing for them in some way. Either it's outdated, or maybe they had a really great blog writer on staff in 2016, and all of the articles talk about what was happening in 2016. So they need to be scrubbed for anything that was current at the time and just brought up to become evergreen content. Or a lot of times people come to us and they have a huge library of content. Maybe the CEO has written a book, or he or she has spoken and they have a whole catalog of speeches and presentations in addition to old blog posts. And a lot of what we do at that level is a bit of an editorial audit, and then a repurposing, right? How can we use this content? How can we make it usable now? How can we make it valuable to you now? So a lot of editing at that point is evaluating and updating. That could be any level of editing, right? That's not necessarily one level over another. And like all of our editorial operations, those conversations start with talking to the stakeholders, understanding the purposes of the content that you need, and then understanding the level of writing or editing that would be needed to accomplish that. Yeah, we come in at all levels. We work with some large Fortune 50, Fortune 10 companies where they have writers that come in from all over the place, but they have really high editorial standards for who can publish on their blog. And so they'll hire us to essentially be the arbiters of style, where we'll take their style guide or we'll help them even create a style guide. And then anyone who writes for them, it comes through us. We're that final look on the way out. So that, again, that one voicing, all of the content has the same level of quality. It's all styled in the same way. It feels cohesive. So from the blog perspective, even if there's 50 writers, it's going to feel nice and consistent.
What are the pieces that we're missing when we're staffing our team? Like when we're building a 3-person writing board, we're building a 5, or what are we missing?
Look, finding a great writer is key. I'm not going to dispute that note. In general, of course, having great writers, having great editorial talent is key. That's what we're all about, is finding great editorial talent. But we as humans are a finite resource. So what we're really talking about today is, how do you scale that content? How do you make that content continuous, knowing that someone can leave or someone's work, they can become full up? How do you maintain content quality at scale? That's really the big question, right? So if someone comes in and they want really high quality, potentially technical or niche content, that's going to be several things, right? High performing based on the data and research. So something with the SEO backbone, that's number one. But also, so it's going to perform well, but also going to be valuable to an informed reader. That's a really important piece. And also, it's going to be successful in whatever the marketing metric of success is there, and moving people down the decision making funnel. If you write 100 pieces over the next year, that's a big undertaking, right? So those are the conversations we're having. Those are the teams we're helping build. Um, and that can't be accomplished by one writer. And it certainly is a high risk if you have one writer who you think can do it and then something happens and they're no longer available. They're no longer an asset to you. So what we really talk about is how to build that assembly line that's going to create a really great output, a really great content deliverable at the end that isn't just about one writer. And so for us, what we have learned is it's about creating and creating a process really above everything else, and a workflow that is going to make sure that the quality remains the same regardless of the people. You've got to have good people. We're so invested in hiring and training and coaching everyone who's on this team. But what the most important thing to us is understanding the process and how people, the role that they play within that process. The writer is such a small piece of the assembly line. It's important to have someone who can be in there with close to the words. But if I just break down really fast, I'll break down really fast what our assembly line looks like. What are
It's
those
also
pieces,
important.
right? If anyone listening is thinking, what do I need to build in order to really establish a high value, high quality output of content at scale? We break that down into so many roles. You might have one writer who does all of these things, but again, they're a finite resource. So what happens when you need more? So We start with we have a full interview team. Their job is to work with directly with the client, and there's a whole expectation setting piece which I can talk about separately. But once expectations are set, we understand the goals of the content, we understand the target audience, we understand the voice and tone. You tell us once, we keep that knowledge and we share that among our team because we package it in a way that's really digestible to the whole editorial staff. And from there, we build the team. So we have the interviewer. They're going to be the person communicating. We obviously, of course, have a project manager that keeps production schedules and calendars and makes sure everybody shows up to the meetings and everything gets done. We then have this could sometimes be the same person, but essentially that developmental editor, they're going to come in and they're going to do the ideation. What does this piece need to be about? What's the kind of central thesis of this article? If you're writing a 2,000 word article with a million different H2s, that it's really important to stop and say, what does a reader need to walk away from? What are we really trying to say here beyond just hitting the SEO structure and content score? We add that layer really. What does the client want to see in this article? What's going to be valuable to their informed reader? And then that gets packaged, it gets given to the writer writes. They're given all these writing instructions, all of this material and these resources to write from. That's where obviously the big step happens. And then from there it continues down that assembly line. It goes back to the dev editor. It might go back to the writer at that point for some rewrites. Then it continues on, goes down to a copy editor, to a proofreader, et cetera. We can write a very big, robust piece, but it's gone through that entire editorial line. And when we hand it back, it's essentially publish ready. Of course, at that point, we'll do feedback rounds and close any feedback loops with stakeholders, but we're giving them a piece that it's the layers of thought and the layers of beyond just SEO or good writing or all these things, the layers of strategy that go into them is what makes them, I think, the most valuable ultimately.
One of the things you mentioned, and I'll just pivot this to a different line, is a content brief and an SME interview. How do those things turn into payload?
That's the basis of all of this, right? Is those are the two keys that you have to have at the beginning. And certainly there are some less technical businesses out there that might feel like, I don't, do you really need an SME? Our answer usually is at first, please, yes, because it's always going to be valuable. That subject matter expert might be the marketing manager. It might be the CEO just talking about what are your products or services. We're always going to want access to those SMEs because a really valuable piece of content is going to primarily do two things. It's going to perform well in search and it's going to be valuable to an informed reader. And in order to be those two things, you need the two things you just said. You need a great SEO brief. So we get really great data from MarketMuse from the platform. That sets us up for success to start. And then what we try to bring to the table from there, besides knowing how to write to these briefs, is pulling out the information that's going to make each article, each piece valuable to an informed reader.
Right.
That's when we'll meet with SMEs. We get to know SMEs on teams. If you're going to really dig into database and cloud services, you've got to talk to an engineer, you've got to a developer. So we identify who are those key stakeholders on your team that you can let us work. We manage those relationships. We try and make that really easy. Those are the things we get from SME interviews on top of just the content. We want to get it right. And without talking to people, we can't know. We can send a questionnaire and all of that, but we get there too with clients who, if they prefer it, what are the resources out there? Who do you want us linking to? Who are the subject matter experts in your industry that are non-competitive?
Right.
So we'll get all of that information on an article per article basis. So it keeps us moving really fast, but it keeps that feedback on the back end really low. So if we get all this information up front, we can write a great piece. We can send it over to those SMEs and to anyone else who's doing the approvals, and they can look at it and be like, "Oh, they hit it."
How do you ensure that search doesn't get lost throughout the process,
So,
above and beyond just that brief? And then who should own that on an in-house team?
mm,
That it is
mm,
optimal.
what a great question, because that speaks to probably some of the biggest pain points that we feel within the editorial process when that gets lost or when there's not that internal alignment about what you want a piece to be. If you ask two different stakeholders, what is the purpose of this? And one says SEO and one says, I really want it to be a deep dive into this topic. So when someone reads, whoa, 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 whoa. So what I said before about having those kickoffs and getting that internal alignment, It's really for us understanding who's the final sign off here, but also does everybody understand what we're trying to accomplish? We have had multiple times, we've had clients where we think we've gotten that, and we've had a lot of lessons learned here. And you get down to the final stakeholder approvals, and someone comes in and they weren't involved in the original conversations. They don't necessarily understand the SEO purpose, and they want to turn that piece into a white paper essentially. And they start stuffing in all of this content. Well, if you're going to talk about this, you also have to talk about these three other pieces. And a piece that maybe started out at 1,500 words is getting to 3,500 words, and the SEO is like gone. It's in the ether, right? That's the scenario you want to avoid. Get everybody aligned on this is why we're doing what we're doing. You brought us in because you care about SEO, because you want this piece to be found. You want it to perform. We've identified this is where it is on the funnel. This is who's reading it. This is how it's going to get in front of a key decision maker.
What I'd say is your search engine optimization team needs to own search engine optimization, right? The content team being aligned on what the goals of those pieces are. The dream scenario is you're not touching it. And that's your aspirational goal. And who will love that more than the editor, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the type of experience you want to develop.